It was an ordinary afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood when 17-year-old Marcus, a bright and ambitious high school senior, pulled into his driveway in his prized possession, a sleek black sedan he'd worked tirelessly to buy. For Marcus, that car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a symbol of his hard work, independence, and dreams of a brighter future. But what was supposed to be a peaceful day quickly spiraled into chaos when the rumble of motorcycles shattered the stillness of the neighborhood. Out of nowhere, a gang of bikers roared down the street, their engines growling like thunder. At first, Marcus thought they were just passing through. He gave them a quick glance as he grabbed his backpack from the passenger seat. But something about the way they slowed down made his stomach tighten. He froze as the leader of the group, a burly man with a skull emblem on his leather jacket, pointed directly at him. "Nice ride, kid," the man growled, his voice dripping with menace. Before Marcus could react, the bikers swarmed his driveway. The leader dismounted his bike, towering over Marcus like a shadow. "Keys," he demanded, extending a gloved hand. Heart pounding, Marcus hesitated, trying to process what was happening. These men didn't look like they were here for a friendly chat. He glanced around, hoping a neighbor might notice the commotion, but the street was eerily empty. Swallowing hard, Marcus mustered his courage. "You can't just take my car," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The leader's lips curled into a cruel smirk. "Watch us." With a quick nod, one of the other bikers shoved Marcus aside, yanking the keys from his hand. Helplessly, Marcus watched as they piled into his car, revved the engine and sped off, leaving a trail of dust and despair in their wake. Marcus stood there, stunned and seething. He felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. That car represented everything he'd worked for. A summer of late shifts, saved allowances, and skipped outings with friends. Now it was gone, stolen by men who didn't care about his story or struggles. But this wasn't where Marcus's story ended. As the bikers celebrated their easy theft, they had no idea what was coming next. Because what they had just taken wasn't an ordinary car. It was something much more valuable and dangerous. Minutes later, the bikers would find themselves in a situation they could have never predicted, their arrogance turning into desperation. And Marcus? He was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. This is the story of how one young man's determination, resilience, and a twist of fate turned the tables in the most unexpected way. You won't believe what happens next. Marcus stood frozen in his driveway, his heart racing as the sound of his car's engine faded into the distance. He felt powerless, a mix of anger and disbelief coursing through him. His hands clenched into fists as he replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The smug smirk of the biker leader, the roar of the motorcycles, and the feeling of losing something so deeply personal. He had to do something, but what? He didn't have the strength or the resources to go after them alone. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pulled out his phone and called the police. His voice shook as he explained what had happened, but even as he gave the details, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another case for them, a stolen car among thousands. The dispatcher assured him that officers would be on their way, but Marcus knew time was critical. Every second wasted meant his car was getting farther and farther away. Marcus didn't have much faith in the system, and he wasn't the type to just sit around and wait. After hanging up, he walked into his house, pacing the living room as his mind raced. He couldn't let those bikers get away with this. Not only had they stolen his car, but they had also disrespected him, his hard work, and his community. He wasn't about to let them win. As he paced, his eyes fell on the small black box sitting on the kitchen counter. It was a GPS tracker he'd bought months ago, a precaution his dad had insisted on when Marcus first got the car. "You never know," his dad had said, handing him the device. At the time, Marcus had rolled his eyes, thinking it was overkill, but now he felt a surge of gratitude. Without wasting another second, he grabbed his laptop, pulled up the GPS app, and logged in. There it was, a blinking dot on the map, moving steadily down the highway. Marcus's chest tightened as he watched the dot head toward the outskirts of the city, far from the safety of his neighborhood. He had a decision to make. The smart thing would be to wait for the police, to let them handle it. But Marcus wasn't feeling patient. He texted his best friend, Jamal, someone he could always count on in a pinch. Jamal was the kind of guy who loved adventure and had a knack for getting into and out of trouble. "Need your help. Urgent." "My car got stolen," Marcus typed, sending the message before he could second-guess himself. Within minutes, Jamal called. "Man, what happened?" "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Marcus quickly filled him in, telling him about the bikers, the GPS tracker, and his plan to follow the signal. Jamal didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything crazy until I get there," he said before hanging up. While he waited, Marcus grabbed a flashlight, a portable phone charger, and a small baseball bat he kept in his closet. He wasn't sure what he was preparing for, but he wanted to be ready. His mom always said he had a stubborn streak, and tonight he was proving her right. 15 minutes later, Jamal pulled up in his beat-up sedan, the headlights cutting through the growing darkness. "You really want to do this?" Jamal asked as Marcus climbed into the passenger seat. Marcus nodded, his jaw set. "They took my car, Jamal. They don't get to just walk away." Jamal sighed but didn't argue. He knew Marcus well enough to know there was no changing his mind. "All right, let's do this," he said, pulling out onto the road and following the blinking dot on the GPS. As they drove, Marcus's mind raced with questions. Who were these bikers? Why had they targeted him? And what would they do when they realized his car wasn't just any car? Because unbeknownst to them, Marcus's car wasn't just loaded with sentimental value. It also contained something they weren't expecting. In the trunk, hidden beneath a pile of old gym clothes, was a locked briefcase belonging to Marcus's dad. His father worked as a cybersecurity consultant, often handling sensitive information for major clients. That morning, before leaving for work, his dad had asked Marcus to drop off the briefcase at a secure location downtown. Marcus had agreed, but between school, practice, and errands, he'd completely forgotten about it. Now the briefcase was in the hands of those bikers, and Marcus had no idea what it contained. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Whatever was in that briefcase, it was clearly important, and possibly dangerous. If the bikers discovered it, who knew what they might do? Marcus clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He couldn't let this spiral further out of control. The GPS signal led them out of the city and into a more desolate area where the streetlights were few and far between. Jamal turned off the main road onto a gravel path, the sound of the tires crunching beneath them, breaking the eerie silence. "You sure about this, man?" Jamal asked, glancing at Marcus. "I don't have a choice," Marcus replied, his voice firm. As they drove deeper into the darkness, they spotted a faint glow in the distance, a fire surrounded by the silhouettes of motorcycles. The bikers had set up camp in what looked like an abandoned lot, their laughter and voices carrying through the night. Jamal parked the car a safe distance away, killing the headlights. "What's the plan?" he whispered. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He watched the scene, his mind racing as he tried to figure out his next move. The bikers looked relaxed, confident, like they had no reason to worry. That was about to change. But before Marcus could act, something unexpected happened. One of the bikers opened the trunk of his car, pulling out the briefcase. The leader stepped forward, his face illuminated by the firelight. He gestured toward the briefcase, and Marcus could see his expression change, curiosity mixed with suspicion. The leader said something to the others, and they all gathered around, their attention now focused on the briefcase. Marcus's stomach dropped. Whatever was inside, it was enough to capture their interest. Jamal nudged him. "We can't let them open that." Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. Marcus and Jamal crouched low in the bushes, their breaths shallow as they watched the bikers gather around the briefcase. The glow of the fire reflected off the leader's face as he turned the sleek, black case over in his hands. His expression shifted from smug amusement to intrigue. Clearly, he hadn't expected to find something like this in a car stolen from a teenager. "What do you think's inside?" one of the bikers asked, his voice loud enough to carry in the stillness of the night. "Could be cash," another chimed in, rubbing his hands together. "Or something valuable." The leader, still holding the briefcase, stepped closer to the fire. He examined the lock carefully, his lips curling into a sly grin. "Whatever it is, it's worth finding out," he said, pulling a knife from his belt. Marcus's heart sank as he watched the blade glint in the firelight. His father's warnings echoed in his mind. The briefcase was off limits, even to him. He had no idea what was inside, but he knew it wasn't something to be tampered with. The bikers, however, seemed undeterred by the unknown. As the leader slid the tip of the knife into the lock, Jamal nudged Marcus. "We gotta stop them," he whispered urgently. "How?" Marcus hissed back, his voice low but filled with frustration. He wanted nothing more than to march over there and grab the briefcase, but they were outnumbered and unarmed. The bikers were dangerous, and any wrong move could backfire spectacularly. "Think, man," Jamal urged, his eyes scanning the camp. "We need a distraction or something. Anything to give us a chance to grab it." Meanwhile, back at the camp, the leader was growing impatient. The lock was tougher than he'd anticipated, and his attempts to pry it open weren't working. He barked orders at one of his men to fetch a crowbar from their stash of tools, and Marcus knew time was running out. Then an idea struck him. It was risky, but it was the only thing he could think of. He leaned closer to Jamal and whispered his plan. Jamal's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like he was going to argue. But then he nodded, his jaw tightening. "All right," he said, "let's do it." Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the GPS app again. His car's engine could be started remotely, a feature he'd rarely used, but one that might just save the day. He took a deep breath, his thumb hovering over the button. "Ready?" he asked Jamal. "Ready," Jamal replied, his hand gripping the flashlight like a weapon. Marcus pressed the button, and in the distance, the car's engine roared to life. The sound cut through the night like a thunderclap, startling the bikers. They spun around, their attention shifting from the briefcase to the car. "What the?" one of them shouted, his voice rising in alarm. The leader barked orders, his tone sharp and commanding. "Get over there. Someone's messing with us." As the bikers scrambled toward the car, Marcus and Jamal made their move. They darted out from the bushes, staying low as they approached the camp. The firelight cast long shadows, and every step felt like an eternity. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline surging through his veins. The briefcase was still by the fire, abandoned in the commotion. Marcus reached it first, his fingers closing around the handle, just as one of the bikers turned back. Their eyes met, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. "Hey," the biker shouted, his voice booming. "Run." Marcus yelled, clutching the briefcase as he bolted toward Jamal, who was already sprinting back to the car. The camp erupted into chaos as the bikers gave chase, their boots pounding against the gravel. Marcus's legs burned as he pushed himself to run faster, the weight of the briefcase slowing him down. He could hear their shouts growing closer, the sound of their footsteps echoing in his ears. Jamal reached the car first, yanking the driver's side door open and jumping inside. He started the engine, the headlights illuminating the dark path ahead. "Come on, Marcus," he shouted, leaning over to throw the passenger door open. Marcus didn't look back. He poured every ounce of energy into those final steps, his lungs screaming for air as he dove into the car. The door slammed shut, and Jamal floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up gravel as they sped away. The bikers didn't give up easily. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the headlights of their motorcycles flickering to life. The roar of their engines filled the night, a chilling reminder that this was far from over. "Faster," Marcus urged, clutching the briefcase tightly. "I'm trying." Jamal shot back, his hands gripping the wheel. The chase was on, the car weaving through the narrow path with the motorcycles in hot pursuit. Marcus could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the briefcase heavy in his lap. He didn't know what was inside, but he knew it was important enough for these men to risk everything to get it back. And as the bikers closed in, their headlights casting eerie shadows on the trees, Marcus realized something else. This wasn't just about the car or the briefcase. It was about standing up for himself, for his family, and for everything he believed in. But the question remained, could he and Jamal outrun the bikers? And even if they did, what secrets did the briefcase hold? The answers were still out of reach, but one thing was certain, the night was far from over. The car's tires screeched as Jamal took a sharp turn, the gravel spraying out beneath them. The headlights from the bikers' motorcycles grew brighter in the rearview mirror, their engines roaring like a pack of wild animals closing in on their prey. Marcus clutched the briefcase tightly to his chest, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. The tension in the car was palpable, every second feeling like an hour. "They're getting closer," Marcus yelled, his voice strained with urgency. "No kidding." Jamal shot back, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He slammed his foot on the gas, the engine groaning in protest as the car surged forward. "You gotta figure something out, man, or we're toast." Marcus's eyes darted around the car, searching for anything that could give them an edge. The flashlight he brought was rolling around on the floor, but it wasn't going to stop a gang of bikers. His gaze landed on the briefcase again, its smooth, unassuming surface a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. "What's in this thing?" Marcus muttered under his breath, his fingers running over the combination lock. His dad had always been secretive about his work, but now Marcus wished he'd asked more questions. Whatever was inside had to be valuable enough to make these bikers desperate. Behind them, the bikers were closing the gap, their headlights slicing through the darkness. One of them pulled up alongside the car, his face twisted in determination. He reached out, trying to grab hold of the door handle. "Hold on," Jamal shouted, jerking the wheel to the left. The car swerved, forcing the biker to back off or risk losing control. Marcus turned to the back seat, his mind racing. "We need to slow them down," he said, his voice tinged with panic. "Like how?" Jamal demanded, his eyes flicking between the road and the bikers. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the backpack he'd thrown onto the back seat earlier. Digging through it, he found a water bottle and a spare t-shirt. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "Here," Marcus said, shoving the bottle into Jamal's free hand. when I say hit the brakes. Jamal glanced at him like he'd lost his mind. Are you serious right now? Just trust me. Marcus insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jamal sighed but nodded. Fine. You better know what you're doing. Marcus rolled down his window, the cold night air rushing in. He twisted the cap off the water bottle and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. The lead biker was gaining on them again, his motorcycle edging closer to the car. Now, Marcus shouted. Jamal slammed on the brakes, and Marcus leaned out of the window, tossing the water bottle straight at the biker. The sudden stop and the unexpected projectile threw the biker off balance, and his motorcycle wobbled dangerously before he skidded off to the side, narrowly avoiding a crash. Nice, Jamal said, slamming his foot back on the gas. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining bikers were still on their tail, and they were angrier than ever. Marcus could see the fury in their faces, their determination to catch them no matter the cost. As the chase continued, the road narrowed, the dense trees on either side making it feel like they were being funneled into a trap. Marcus's grip on the briefcase tightened. He didn't know where they were heading, but it felt like they were running out of options. Where does this road even go? Marcus asked, his voice rising with panic. I don't know. Jamal replied, his eyes scanning the path ahead. But we don't have much choice. The car jolted as they hit a pothole, the briefcase nearly slipping out of Marcus's hands. He cursed under his breath, his frustration mounting. Every second felt like they were teetering on the edge of disaster. And then up ahead, Marcus spotted something, a bridge. It was old and rickety, the kind of structure that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Beyond it was a dense forest, the trees looming like sentinels in the darkness. Head for the bridge. Marcus shouted, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Jamal didn't hesitate, steering the car toward the narrow crossing. The bikers, undeterred, followed close behind, their headlights bouncing erratically over the uneven terrain. But the question remained, could he and Jamal outrun the bikers? And even if they did, what secrets did the briefcase hold? The answers were still out of reach, but one thing was certain, the night was far from over. The car's tires screeched as Jamal took a sharp turn, the gravel spraying out beneath them. The headlights from the bikers' motorcycles grew brighter in the rearview mirror, their engines roaring like a pack of wild animals closing in on their prey. Marcus clutched the briefcase tightly to his chest, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. The tension in the car was palpable, every second feeling like an hour. They're getting closer. Marcus yelled, his voice strained with urgency. No kidding. Jamal shot back, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He slammed his foot on the gas, the engine groaning in protest as the car surged forward. You gotta figure something out, man, or we're toast. Marcus's eyes darted around the car, searching for anything that could give them an edge. The flashlight he brought was rolling around on the floor, but it wasn't going to stop a gang of bikers. His gaze landed on the briefcase again, its smooth, unassuming surface a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. What's in this thing? Marcus muttered under his breath, his fingers running over the combination lock. His dad had always been secretive about his work, but now Marcus wished he'd asked more questions. Whatever was inside had to be valuable enough to make these bikers desperate. Behind them, the bikers were closing the gap, their headlights slicing through the darkness. One of them pulled up alongside the car, his face twisted in determination. He reached out, trying to grab hold of the door handle. Hold on, Jamal shouted, jerking the wheel to the left. The car swerved, forcing the biker to back off or risk losing control. Marcus turned to the back seat, his mind racing. We need to slow them down, he said, his voice tinged with panic. Like how? Jamal demanded, his eyes flicking between the road and the bikers. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the backpack he'd thrown onto the back seat earlier. Digging through it, he found a water bottle and a spare t-shirt. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Here, Marcus said, shoving the bottle into Jamal's free hand. When I say, hit the brakes. Jamal glanced at him like he'd lost his mind. Are you serious right now? Just trust me. Marcus insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jamal sighed but nodded. Fine. You better know what you're doing. Marcus rolled down his window, the cold night air rushing in. He twisted the cap off the water bottle and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. The lead biker was gaining on them again, his motorcycle edging closer to the car. Now, Marcus shouted. Jamal slammed on the brakes, and Marcus leaned out of the window, tossing the water bottle straight at the biker. The sudden stop and the unexpected projectile threw the biker off balance, and his motorcycle wobbled dangerously before he skidded off to the side, narrowly avoiding a crash. Nice, Jamal said, slamming his foot back on the gas. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining bikers were still on their tail, and they were angrier than ever. Marcus could see the fury in their faces, their determination to catch them no matter the cost. As the chase continued, the road narrowed, the dense trees on either side making it feel like they were being funneled into a trap. Marcus's grip on the briefcase tightened. He didn't know where they were heading, but it felt like they were running out of options. Where does this road even go? Marcus asked, his voice rising with panic. I don't know, Jamal replied, his eyes scanning the path ahead. But we don't have much choice. The car jolted as they hit a pothole, the briefcase nearly slipping out of Marcus's hands. He cursed under his breath, his frustration mounting. Every second felt like they were teetering on the edge of disaster. And then up ahead, Marcus spotted something, a bridge. It was old and rickety, the kind of structure that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Beyond it was a dense forest, the trees looming like sentinels in the darkness. Head for the bridge, Marcus shouted, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Jamal didn't hesitate, steering the car toward the narrow crossing. The bikers, undeterred, followed close behind, their headlights bouncing erratically over the uneven terrain. As they approached the bridge, Marcus's mind raced. The wooden planks groaned under the weight of the car as they spat across, the sound echoing into the night. Behind them, the bikers hesitated for a split second before following, their motorcycles roaring as they gave chase. Marcus glanced out the back window, his stomach nodding as he realized how close they still were. They're not giving up. They will if this bridge doesn't hold, Jamal muttered, his eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. Just as they reached the other side, a loud crack echoed through the air. Marcus turned just in time to see one of the planks give way, sending one of the bikers tumbling into the shallow creek below. The rest of the group barely made it across. Their movements now were cautious. It was a small victory, but Marcus knew it wouldn't be enough to stop them completely. The bikers were relentless, and whatever was in the briefcase had put a target on their backs. We can't keep running, Jamal said, his voice grim. We need a plan, and fast. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know how this was going to end, but one thing was certain, they were heading straight for the most dangerous moment of the night, and there was no turning back now. As the car sped deeper into the dense forest, the road became more treacherous. Branches scraped against the windows, and the uneven terrain made the car bounce and jolt with every bump. Jamal gritted his teeth, his focus razor-sharp as he navigated the narrow path. Marcus kept glancing back, his eyes darting between the biker's headlights and the briefcase still clutched in his hands. He could feel the weight of their desperation pressing down on him, and it was clear the chase was far from over. "They're not stopping," Marcus muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "What do we do now?" Jamal didn't answer immediately, his attention fixed on the road ahead. But before he could respond, the path opened into a clearing, and Marcus's stomach dropped. The forest abruptly gave way to a massive construction site, its skeletal structures looming like ghosts in the dim moonlight. Heavy machinery was scattered everywhere, and the unfinished roads twisted and turned in chaotic directions. "We can lose them in there," Jamal said, his voice tinged with both determination and doubt. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. The site was a maze, and one wrong turn could trap them with no way out. But there wasn't time to second-guess. The bikers were closing in, and they had no other options. Jamal veered off the main path and onto the gravel road leading into the construction site. The car's tires skidded as they rounded a corner, narrowly avoiding a stack of metal beams. Behind them, the bikers hesitated for only a moment before following, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The tension in the air was suffocating as the car weaved through the site, dodging obstacles at every turn. Marcus could hear the roar of the motorcycles growing louder, the bikers determined not to let their prey slip away. He clutched the briefcase even tighter, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Why was this briefcase so important? What were they risking their lives for? Suddenly, Jamal slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Marcus lurched forward, barely catching himself as he looked ahead. A massive crane loomed in front of them, its long arm hanging precariously over the road. Below it, a pile of debris blocked their path, leaving no way forward. "Now what?" Marcus asked, panic creeping into his voice. Jamal's eyes darted around, searching for another escape route. But before he could answer, the sound of motorcycles filled the air, and the bikers appeared at the entrance to the clearing. They spread out, their headlights forming an intimidating semicircle around the car. "This is bad," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's grip on the briefcase tightened as the bikers dismounted their motorcycles, their movements deliberate and menacing. The leader stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Marcus, with a cold intensity that sent shivers down his spine. "You've caused us a lot of trouble tonight, kid," the leader said, his voice low and gravelly. "But it ends here. Hand over the briefcase, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Marcus's mind raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel Jamal's tension beside him, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What do we do? Then, out of the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed something. One of the bikers was holding a radio, and it wasn't the kind you'd use for casual communication. It looked military-grade, with an array of buttons and a glowing screen that seemed out of place in this chaotic scene. The realization hit him like a freight train. These weren't just bikers. They were after something far bigger than a stolen car or a teenager's belongings. "Jamal," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. "Look at that radio. These guys aren't who they say they are." Jamal glanced over, his eyes narrowing as he took in the detail. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, swallowing hard, "that whatever's in this briefcase, it's not just valuable, it's dangerous." The leader's patience was wearing thin. He took another step forward, his hand resting on the handle of a knife strapped to his belt. "I'm not asking again," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Give me the briefcase, or I'll take it myself." Marcus's grip on the briefcase tightened even more, his mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. He didn't know what was inside, but he knew he couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Jamal, sensing the rising tension, reached for the flashlight on the floor and gripped it tightly. "We're not going down without a fight," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The leader smirked, clearly amused by their defiance. "Brave," he said, his tone mocking, "but stupid." He motioned to his men, and they began to close in, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. And then, just as the bikers were about to reach the car, a sudden, deafening roar shattered the silence. Marcus and Jamal froze, their eyes widening as they saw headlights appear in the distance. More vehicles, but these weren't motorcycles. They were SUVs, their powerful engines cutting through the night. The bikers turned, their expressions shifting from smug confidence to alarm. The SUVs barreled into the clearing, their doors flying open as armed figures stepped out, their weapons trained on the bikers. "Freeze," one of them shouted, his voice authoritative and commanding. Marcus's mind reeled as the scene unfolded before him. The bikers hesitated, their hands hovering near their weapons as they sized up the newcomers. It was clear that whatever game they'd been playing, it had just been interrupted by an even bigger player. Jamal glanced at Marcus, his voice barely audible. "Who are these guys?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice trembling. "But I think things just got a whole lot more complicated." The tension in the clearing was electric, the standoff poised to explode at any moment. Marcus could feel the weight of the briefcase in his hands, its contents a mystery that had drawn so many into its orbit. And as he watched the bikers and the armed newcomers face off, he realized that they were now at the center of something far larger and more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The clearing was a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as the two groups faced off. The bikers, once so confident, now looked cornered, their bravado cracking under the weight of the heavily armed newcomers. Jumal's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Marcus sat frozen, his heartbeat a deafening drum in his ears, the briefcase like a lead weight in his lap. He didn't dare move, didn't even blink, as he tried to process what was happening. The leader of the bikers raised his hands slowly, a sly smirk creeping across his face. "Well, well, looks like the cavalry has arrived," he said, his voice laced with mock amusement. "But you're a little late to the party, aren't you? Drop your weapons and step away." One of the newcomers barked, his voice sharp and authoritative. His rifle remained trained on the bikers, unwavering. "This is over." The leader chuckled, shaking his head. "Over? Oh, I don't think so." He glanced at Marcus and the briefcase with a predatory glint in his eye. "Not until we get what we came for." Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos spiraling around him. Who were these new people? How did they know about the bikers? And why was everyone so obsessed with this briefcase? Before anyone could respond, the leader made a sudden move, pulling a device from his pocket. It looked like a remote, a single red button blinking ominously on its surface. The sight of it sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. "Nobody moves," the leader said, his voice now ice cold, "unless you want to see just how far we're willing to go." Jamal whispered under his breath, barely audible. "Is that?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice shaking. "But it doesn't look good." The armed newcomers exchanged tense glances, their weapons still raised. One of them stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You don't want to do this," he said, trying to reason with the leader. "We can all walk away from this alive, but you need to put that down." The leader laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the clearing. "Alive," he sneered. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here? This isn't about us. It's about what's inside that briefcase. If you knew, you'd understand why we can't let it go." Marcus's grip on the briefcase tightened, his palms slick with sweat. His heart was racing as he tried to process the leader's words. What could possibly be so important? Suddenly, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He didn't know who to trust or what the truth was, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let anyone else control the situation. Before he could second-guess himself, he reached for the latch on the briefcase. "Wait," Jamal hissed, his eyes wide with alarm. But it was too late. With a click, the briefcase popped open, revealing its contents. Marcus stared, his breath catching in his throat. Inside was a small device, sleek and metallic, its surface glowing faintly with an otherworldly blue light. It looked advanced, far beyond anything he'd ever seen before. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as everyone's eyes locked on the object. "What is that?" Jamal whispered, his voice barely audible. The leader's expression shifted, his smirk disappearing as a mix of awe and fear crossed his face. "You have no idea what you're holding, do you?" he said, his tone almost reverent. Before Marcus could respond, one of the newcomers stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Hand it over now." "No," the leader snapped, his grip tightening on the remote. "If they take it, it's over. You don't understand. They'll use it." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications that Marcus couldn't begin to unravel. He looked between the two groups, his mind racing. Who was telling the truth? And what did it mean for him and Jamal? In the chaos, Marcus made a split-second decision. He grabbed the device from the briefcase and bolted from the car, his feet pounding against the gravel as he ran toward the crane. "Marcus!" Jamal shouted, but Marcus didn't stop. The bikers and the armed newcomers erupted into motion, their shouts filling the air as they scrambled to chase him. Marcus climbed onto the crane, his breath ragged as he scaled the metal frame. The cold steel bit into his palms, but he didn't slow down. Below him, the leader was yelling, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "Don't do it. You don't know what you're dealing with." Marcus reached the top of the crane, his chest heaving as he held the device in his hands. He looked down at the chaos below, the bikers and the newcomers all frozen, their faces painted with a mix of fear and anticipation. And then, in a moment that felt like it stretched into eternity, Marcus made his choice. With all this strength, he hurled the device into the air, watching as it arced high above the clearing. Time seemed to slow as the device hit the ground, shattering on impact. A blinding blue light erupted from the fragments, illuminating the clearing in an otherworldly glow. For a moment, everything was silent. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving behind nothing but darkness and stunned silence. The bikers and the newcomers stood frozen, their faces reflecting a mix of disbelief and shock. Whatever power the device had held, it was gone now, destroyed in an instant. Marcus climbed down from the crane, his legs shaky as he rejoined Jamal at the car. Neither of them spoke, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. As the first rays of dawn began to break through the trees, the bikers and the newcomers began to retreat, their missions now futile. Marcus and Jamal watched in silence as they disappeared into the forest, leaving the clearing empty and still. Jamal finally broke the silence, his voice low and incredulous. "What just happened?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice hollow. "But whatever it was, it's over now." And yet, as they drove away from the clearing, the weight of the night's events lingered. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't truly over, that whatever secrets the briefcase had held were only the beginning of something far bigger than they could imagine. The drive back was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you and presses down on your chest. Marcus and Jamal didn't say much. They didn't have to. The weight of what had just happened was still fresh, and neither of them knew how to process it. The early morning light painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Jamal kept his hands firmly on the wheel, his knuckles still pale from gripping too tightly. He stole glances at Marcus, every now and then, as if trying to gauge if his friend was okay. Marcus, for his part, stared out the window, the broken briefcase now sitting empty on the floor at his feet. "I still don't get it," Jamal finally said, breaking the silence. What was that thing? And why were they all so desperate to get it? Marcus sighed, his breath shaky. "I don't know. Maybe it's better that we don't." He hesitated, his mind flashing back to the blinding blue light. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here. Jamal nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think we did the right thing, destroying it?" Marcus looked over at him, his gaze steady. "Yeah," he said, his voice firm. "I don't know what that thing could have done, but I know it wasn't something good. Better it's gone than in the hands of people like them." They drove on in silence for a while longer, the forest giving way to the outskirts of town. The normalcy of the world felt almost jarring after the events of the night. Houses sat quietly, their windows reflecting the rising sun. People were starting their mornings, oblivious to the chaos that had played out just hours earlier. When they finally reached Marcus's neighborhood, Jamal pulled the car into the driveway. The engine cut off, leaving a strange stillness in its wake. For a moment, neither of them moved. "You okay?" Jamal asked, turning to look at Marcus. "Yeah," Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. He opened the door and stepped out, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. As they stood there, the weight of everything they had been through seemed to settle over them like a thick fog. Marcus leaned against the car, his mind replaying the events over and over. "What happens now?" Jamal asked quietly. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But I think we need to be careful. Just because it's over doesn't mean we're safe." Jamal frowned, his brows knitting together. "You think those people will come back?" "I don't know," Marcus said again, "but I'm not taking any chances." Over the next few days, life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, but the events of that night never left Marcus's mind. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows, and wondering if someone might come looking for answers, or for him. Jamal was a constant presence, his calm demeanor helping to keep Marcus grounded. They spent hours talking about what had happened, trying to piece together the puzzle of the briefcase and the strange device it had contained. Despite their efforts, they were left with more questions than answers. One afternoon, as they sat on Marcus's porch, Jamal leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. "You think we'll ever know the truth?" Marcus shook his head. "Probably not. But maybe that's okay. Some things are better left a mystery." Jamal nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Still, it feels like there's something we're missing. Like this was part of something bigger." "Maybe it was," Marcus said. "But whatever it was, it's not our problem anymore." As the days turned into weeks, the memories of that night began to fade, though they never disappeared entirely. Marcus found himself thinking less about the bikers and the armed newcomers and more about the lessons he had learned. He realized how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change, and how important it was to stand up for what was right, even when it was scary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus sat in his room, staring out the window. The faint sound of crickets filled the air, and a cool breeze drifted through the open window. He thought about the choices he had made that night, the risks he had taken, and the strength he hadn't known he possessed. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see his mom standing there, a soft smile on her face. "Everything okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." She walked over and sat on the edge of his bed, her gaze gentle and curious. "You've seemed different lately, like something's been on your mind." Marcus hesitated, his instinct to protect her from the truth kicking in. "Just lice stuff," he said vaguely. She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, whatever it is, you'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think, Marcus." Her words stayed with him long after she left the room. Stronger than you think. He wasn't sure if that was true, but he hoped it was. As he lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, Marcus felt a sense of closure. The events of that night had changed him, but they hadn't broken him. If anything, they had shown him what he was capable of, and what it meant to fight for something bigger than himself. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. And as he drifted off to sleep, the faint hum of the crickets outside lulling him into a sense of calm, Marcus knew one thing for certain. Some stories don't have easy endings. But that doesn't mean they don't leave you stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next.